Welcome to the FarmBits Podcast.
FarmBits is proudly produced by the Nebraska Digital Agriculture Team and hosted by students at the University of Nebraska.
The FarmBits Podcast comes to you each week to discuss the trends, the realities, and the value of digital agriculture.
Through interviews with experts, producers, and innovators from across the agriculture industry, we hope that you step away from each episode with new practical knowledge of digital agriculture technology.
Hello, FarmBits followers, and welcome to another episode of the FarmBits Podcast. I'm Taylor Cross.
And I'm Kelsey Swantek, and we're glad to have you with us today as we continue to learn more about Nebraska Extension and the OnFarm Research Network.
Today, we're joined by Glen Spangler, a Cass County farmer who's been working with the OnFarm Research Network for 2 years now.
With new technologies allowing him to advance his farm, he shares his story about how Nebraska Extension resources have impacted his operation.
With that, let's jump into this episode with Glen.
My name's Glen Spangler. I got a degree in mechanized systems management from the University of Nebraska, and after college I returned to my family farm here in Cass County, Nebraska, which is just south of Omaha and east of Lincoln. We are a corn and soybean farm on a rotation. Nearly all of our acres are terraced, and we're farming on the contours, and we've been no-till since the mid-'80s.
Very cool. So from the way I understand this, you have been a listener of the FarmBits podcast for a long time now, and you heard about the OnFarm Research Network through the FarmBits podcast. So you kind of reached out, and you are now participating in the OnFarm Research Network. And now you've come full circle, and you're back on the FarmBits podcast. So can you kind of share your story with the OnFarm Research Network, how long you've been participating, and how you kind of got involved originally?
Sure, yeah. Like you mentioned, a year or two ago, Laura Thompson, the director of the OnFarm Research Network, was interviewed on the FarmBits podcast, and I was totally unfamiliar with it before that point. And hearing her walk through about all the help the Extension Service can provide in setting up trials on your own farm with your own equipment to kind of create your own results was really interesting to me. And so pretty soon after I heard about it, I reached out and got in contact and set up something to start that spring.
Awesome. That's really cool that you've been able to come full circle with the OnFarm Research Network. Do you mind sharing a little bit about the projects that you've participated in and those research trials and what they've kind of entailed?
Yeah, this growing season right now is just my second year of the OnFarm Research Network, so I'm still very green in the ways of the trials. But we had upgraded our planter with some new technology that allowed us to do some variable rate seeding. And so for a more simple trial to start with, I tried a soybean population trial. And we were testing populations from 80,000 up to 140,000. And come harvest time, they all yielded nearly the same, which was pretty surprising to me, being as the plant population was almost doubled. The stand count was almost doubled from the lowest to the highest, yet the yield was pretty much flat. So that was pretty interesting. This year I'm repeating the soybean trial again, but since the yields were pretty flat from last year's trial, I'm lowering my populations even lower to try 70,000 to 110,000. And I also have a corn population trial going where I'm testing a planter box applied biological product at the same time.
So precision technology is obviously a big part of what you're doing with the OnFarm research. Can you kind of talk specifically about the role that the digital or precision technology plays in these trials?
Sure. Yeah. Personally, I think very few of the trials that most people are doing right now would even be possible without, the wide proliferation of all the ag technologies and able to store and keep using your data from previous years to look forward. We on our farm, we have about 12 or 13 years of planting and yield maps, already, stored at my fingertips for use. And we have GPS-based combine yield maps that date back to the 90s. Unfortunately, a lot of that older stuff only exists on paper just because, home computing and the ability to process that data wasn't really, reasonably priced or even available. I can't say for sure on that, but so we just have printed maps that, give you a full-size field overview, but not really granular data. And in the fields that I've personally done, the variable rate seeding and having good combine yield maps have made it possible to conduct these trials.
Yeah, that's really, really important to be able to allow your data to come full circle and take those yield maps and from all the way from your seeding maps and be able to correlate that data. So based on what you've learned in the trials that you have conducted, you said it was only 2 years so far, so you've only truly completed one set of data, but how have you taken that data and implemented it on other sites, maybe what you've learned from those trials?
Yeah, as you said, I'm still on the new side of things since I've only finished 1 year of trials. But so far, what I have finished has kind of reinforced my belief that I can, at least in our area, we can safely lower the soybean population and still maintain yield. And as a side effect of that, because you're spending less on seed, you're also increasing your net profit per acre since you're spending less on the seed and still getting the same yields. So I have been trying some lower populations for a number of years, but it's nice to have that belief reinforced with some actual data.
Have you noticed a change in yourself personally since you've started participating in these trials? Like, do you have a different mindset, or do you think through things a little bit differently? Because you're kind of on the research side of things now, and I know researchers and farmers think very differently sometimes. Have you noticed that change in yourself at all?
Yeah, somewhat. I wasn't really aware of all the necessities that go into conducting a good research trial, all the the randomization and the repetition of blocks and things so that you can take the variability of the different art areas of the field kind of out of the equation so you know that you have some data you can rely on. I read up on it since I became involved somewhat so I could understand the reason why the trials were situated and arranged like they were and the importance of good data collection.
Yes, that is very important.
So from year to year, I know this is only your second year of growing so far. What's kind of like, how do you keep standardization across, I guess, kind of the studies from year to year? Like, do you use the same hybrids, or do you change hybrids and varieties from year to year, or do you kind of keep that part the same, or how does like that standardization work across the year?
Well, this the second year soybean trial, I have switched to a different variety because the one I used last year, I was kind of disappointed in the results overall. I had higher yielding, significantly higher yielding hybrids on or varieties on different fields. So I'm not using that same variety again. But of course, for the research trials, you need to use the same variety throughout the whole trial and the different parts of the field, so so you take that variability out of it.
At the end of your studies, are you just taking into is your only response variable like yield? Or are you taking into account any weed pressure? When you're analyzing that yield monitor, I guess, what's the process there?
So far, yield has been the only metric that I've paid attention to. It might be a good idea to look at the weed pressure in the future as well, because of course a bigger canopy from a higher soybean population, or perhaps if they close faster, it definitely could have an effect on the weed pressure. I haven't looked into that just yet. Uh, of course the analysis of the trials is all done by the on-farm research team, which gives me a lot of confidence in the results because they know all the statistics to be able to evaluate it properly. Because I might be able to look at it on my computer and draw some conclusions, but I can't go into the much more granular individual data points analysis that really brings the confidence to the trial so that I know that it really means something and that it's not just I'm seeing what I want to see.
I think that's really important. That does make a lot of sense. And I know Taylor and I are both part of the On-Farm Research Network, and we have Taylor, I guess, kind of has her own trial that I help her out with. And there's 1,000,010 things you could analyze on all these research studies, and to even like think about what to look for or what you want to know is huge. So there's always more ideas, but at the same time, you have to keep that core, like, this is the study we're doing, and then from there, if there's other things you want to look at, like, you can. But yeah, I think that's very interesting, but I think that's really cool too. How do you see the tools that you're using through, like, with Nebraska Extension? How do you see them leading up to success on your operation?
The ultimate goal of me participating in these trials is to increase the profitability of the farms and the acres that I manage. So learning how the farms respond to different populations, different products, different fertility is how I plan to accomplish that.
Awesome. So a really cool question that I have for you is what technologies do you wish that existed that might not currently be on the market that you see a potential in your operation?
I think most of the tools and technology that I could want are out there in some form. It's more of a matter of affordability for for a smaller average sized farm because I mean you can money fixes a lot of problems, but if you can't afford it or make it really work at the price point you have available for that kind of technology or machine or anything like that.
That's something we talked about a few weeks ago with Dean Kroll from the NRD. He kind of said the same thing. So he works for the NRD, he works for UNL, and he also has his own operation. And he said, like, we kind of had to go through phases on my operation because I don't have unlimited resources. And that's like the whole farm problem right there. If we had unlimited money, everything would be solved, but we don't. So
Yep.
knowing your own limits and your own resources and utilizing what you can, I think is very important.
Hmm.
Um, what is the biggest challenge that you've faced personally or as an operation as a whole with digital technology?
Uh, I'd say the biggest hurdle for me is the issue of rural connectivity. I mean, even though I am close to the big metro areas of Omaha and Lincoln, still I'm stuck on what is by today's standards kind of antiquated DSL technology. So when it comes to working with big data files that are generating every year, they can balloon to some really big file sizes. And so if I'm trying to work with them locally on my own computer, that's not a big problem. It's easy to transfer stuff from a flash drive on a computer or something. But if I want to work with some kind of online platform, your internet connection speed is a huge bottleneck. Just as a for instance, this spring I wanted to look at some of my planting data on an online platform, and so well, I have a precision planting monitor which makes some pretty big planting files because they're recording a lot of little statistics for every row. But just to upload my planting data from this year was a 20-hour wait, which is kind of hard to stomach.
That's very extensive. Yeah.
And I mean, and that's just a single operation for a single year. If I wanted to move everything I already if all the data I've already generated, that would be a huge amount of time and a big commitment if you have end up not liking it.
Yes, I'm from Southeast Virginia, and rural connectivity is a problem out there too. It's not just Nebraska. It is definitely a problem, and our internet speed and connectivity just in our GPS units it's a struggle on the daily. So
Mm-hmm.
I understand
We
that.
talked about that on a one of our Open for Business by FarmBits episodes last season, I think
Mhm.
that was with Julie Bichelle. She is the founder, I gotta think back. I think founder of Page Wireless, and they're a company that they're trying to increase that rural connectivity. And like talking to her was so much fun because she's just so positive about it all, and she's like, I can change the world, and that's what I'm gonna do. And she was just so matter of fact about it. It was very cool. So if you haven't listened to that episode, I absolutely recommend doing that. But
Okay.
uh what are some resources that Nebraska Extension produces that are really helpful to you as a producer and that you would recommend to other producers that are listening?
Sure. I always keep up with all the crop watch articles they put out because they're covering a lot of the current conditions in the state, and they are always highlighting issues that farmers may be dealing with at the moment. And one of those more specifically is the soybean gall midge research because that's been a pest that's really been having a big effect in our area. And we had some pretty big yield hits a few years ago. I think the first year was really in the area. It really took down a few of our fields.
So how else has Nebraska Extension and its resources maybe benefited you as a producer, and what potential benefit do you see Nebraska Extension offering to producers maybe outside of Nebraska?
Sure. I think the all the neb guides they put out and have put out for many years can be a really big resource. They lay out a ton of best practices, general recommendations for nearly every area of crop production, and and livestock and all the other things that Nebraska agriculture is involved in. I've perused many of them to see if I should be making any changes. And the thing I like about them is they're all based on university research in Nebraska, which makes them a very reliable source of information. And, I've also looked at the equivalent research from many different Midwestern universities that I kind of compiled. If there's a certain area or topic that I'm interested in or trying to find an answer for, I'll reference other universities' researches. So I'm imagining that the rest of the Midwest is looking to the Neb guides as well.
I think it's so cool how much you've talked today and shared with just your experience and like using those resources that the university puts out. It's really reassuring to know that, like those resources and all that research that we're doing is getting used and is benefiting growers like you and so forth.
Yeah, definitely.
I feel like I sound like a broken record player. I've talked about this on every episode I've been on this season, but Nebraska Extension is not trying to sell you something. And that's a huge value that's added to that, because they're not saying like, I work for a company and I'm going to make commission off this, so this is what they use. We just give you the information and you do with it what you want to do with it. And you can take it as far as you want to for your own operation and make it make sense to you without that pressure of sales.
Yeah. And the fact that they're willing to point out if something doesn't work, which, nobody that's trying to sell you anything will ever tell you that something doesn't work, other than the competitor's product, of course.
Right.
Of course. Yeah.
Knowing a practice that just doesn't pay off is worthwhile information as well.
How has your operation benefited from not only the trials that you're working on, but all the resources that the On-Farm Research Network and Nebraska Extension offer to you, or any other digital technologies that are out there that really helps you in your own operation?
It requires a lot of knowledge to set up an on-farm trial, from the design to the analysis to the boots on the ground to evaluate the trial as it's growing. All of that would be pretty difficult for me to put together on my own. So to have a resource like the on-farm research team and the extension service to help you out with all that makes it completely possible.
So what do you think the future of digital ag and precision technologies, including, those variable rate technologies that you've been implementing, what do you think the future of that looks like?
I think from gathering the data that we do every year from every operation, I think that eventually that will all go into these crop models and fertilizer modeling that many companies are trying to put together. So I hope that someday they will become reliable enough for widespread use to help you choose varieties and hybrids of corn and soybeans that will work best in your fields, and the different nutrient requirements that will yield the best revenue per acre. I think that eventually all the data that we're collecting and feeding into these systems will eventually make it accurate enough to make a big difference.
And kind of going off that, what types of technology, if like you see someone and they just kind of come up to you and they say, I heard you're on FarmBits, or I know that you're involved in this, like, where do I start? What's kind of your biggest technology that you'd recommend to another grower if they would ask that question to you?
Well, to be able to control and influence a system, first you have to be able to measure it. So, to that end, you should be collecting and storing all of the data that you're generating from all of your monitors. From every pass through the field, you should be collecting that and storing that in some way so that you have those records for use in the future. Even if you aren't using it right now, someday it will all become important if you keep it organized and accessible. For our operation, we invested in some new planting technology recently that's been rewarding. Advanced seed monitoring on our planter allows me to really fine tune how the meters are working for the different seed varieties, seed sizes, so that I can make sure that they're performing the best possible. The hydraulic downforce helps keep the planting depth uniform, which can be sometimes can be a challenge in a no-till system, because we fall apply our nitrogen with the knife, and so those strips that we're sometimes crossing back and forth over many times on a contoured field, those are of course softer than the places that haven't been touched. And so having the hydraulic downforce to keep the seed depth uniform is really nice. And it's pretty impressive how accurate they are and how responsive, because I can look at the map of my row unit downforce and I can see exactly where my fertilizer sprayer tracks were from over the winter, for example, just because the ground is a little bit firmer right there where the tire tracks were. And I also have some smart farmers on the planter that are reporting the soil properties as I plant. I'm hoping someday to average all those values together and try and find some kind of correlation to how the fields perform. Specifically looking at the organic matter reading, try and make some more accurate organic matter maps for the field, and maybe use that someday.
Yeah, that is really neat. And I think you have a pretty good mindset going on this research and, compiling this data compared to some growers that I've talked to in the past. So that's really, really good to hear. And I like the initiative that you're taking on your operation.
We've kind of brushed over this idea, I think, throughout this episode, but I kind of want you to like pull it out and just say it to us. What value does the On-Farm Research Network have to you, and what is the potential value to others in Nebraska, whether they participate in the studies or just the information they can get from those studies?
Yeah, I have the On-Farm Research team puts out a fairly sizable booklet every year of all the trials that are produced across the whole state, covering numerous areas. And I think a lot of archives are available on their website. I've looked through those before to see if some products that I'd heard of, if they'd been tested before on farms in Nebraska, and I have found some that were, and they didn't provide any results, so I just kind of put that idea aside. But having that record of everyone else's trials that are all happening concurrently, and they can kind of be collaborated on a certain topic, be it soybean seeding rates. That's tested all across the state every year. From being involved in the research trials, it also sets my mind to work to different topics that I'd like to research in the future. I already have a few ideas that I've generated this year while I'm watching the crops grow that I'd like to try in the fall. Some nitrogen trials, try out some of the nitrogen modeling on the field, perhaps. So just getting involved with the research network really helps you think through how the trials work and things that you could try in the future. And so it's really neat to kind of shift your mindset into a more of a research side.
So, Glen, we have a tradition on the FarmBits podcast to ask for a piece of advice. So from you, we want to know if you have any advice for producers like yourself that want to try a new technology or just get involved with the Nebraska On-Farm Research Network.
I think if you want to learn something for yourself on your own farm with your own equipment, the On-Farm Research Program is the starting point. So start with something very simple, like for instance, how I did, just a simple seeding trial. And then once you learn the ropes from doing that, you can branch out in any direction you're interested in. And just you have all the resources there. They'll help you from every step of the way, even if you know nothing going in, and they'll make it really mean something at the end of the year.
Thank you very much to Glen Spangler for taking the time to join this episode of the FarmBits podcast. We've heard from a lot of extension educators this season, so it's really cool to hear about Nebraska Extension from a different perspective. You could tell that Glen has already been seeing benefits from participating in the On-Farm Research Network and sees immense value in Nebraska Extension's resources. I have to say, in addition to that, one of my favorite parts of this episode was how just advancing one part of his operation really allowed and opened up all these windows in digital technology so that he could track that data from planting to yield monitors and really make decisions on all fields on his operation.
I agree, but I think my favorite part had to be hearing how Glen came full circle from hearing about on-farm research on the podcast, reaching out, having success, and now he's here as a guest sharing his own story. That's really what FarmBits is all about.
This episode marks the end of the summer season, but we'll be back on September 22nd with a few new faces. See you then! Thank you for taking the time to join us today on the FarmBits podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts to be informed about the latest content each week.
We welcome your feedback, so if you have comments or questions for us, please reach out to us over email, on Twitter, or in the reviews section of your favorite podcast platform. Our contact information can be found in the show notes.
We would like to thank Nebraska Extension for their support of this podcast and their commitment to providing high-quality informational material to members of the agricultural community in Nebraska and beyond.
The opinions expressed by the hosts and guests on this podcast are solely their own and do not reflect the views of Nebraska Extension or the University of Nebraska-Lincoln.
We look forward to you joining us next week for another episode of FarmBits.